clarity or oppressive rhetoric, the majority of states require young women to obtain parental consent for having abortion. These laws systematically endanger women from the risk of domestic violence and accessory risky back alley abortion. Judicial bypasses woefully insufficient teenage lack of mobility make it a reasonable alternative. Hayes 13. The majority of states require consent from parents before abortion. These laws delay access, endangering young women's health and safety. Many teens live in dysfunctional environments. Parental laws can involve these families into stable homes, forcing teens to involve parents who place them at risk. 50% have experienced violence, 30% fear violence, or being forced to leave the home. Parental involvement laws disproportionately affect women of color who are more likely to experience pregnancy as minors are disproportionately living in states where parental laws are in effect. Research shows that parental notification laws have no effect on women's decision to talk to their parent prior to abortion. The laws have no impact on birth rates. Judicial bypass is not a reasonable alternative. Minors do not know bypass is available or denied bypass by biased judges. Medical experts oppose parental consent laws. Thus, the plan resolved. The United States federal government should abolish abortion and parental involvement laws. Hayes 13. Young people deserve the right to have full abortion care. Activists must stand against the harmful parental involvement restrictions that put their health and well-being at risk. We are fighting to abolish parental involvement laws. Legislation which seeks to protect women's access to abortion must include younger women and protect their access to safe, legal, and affordable abortion care. And the plan avoids decide legal abortions are the safest options for teenagers. ACLU 15. The risk of denied health care outweighs the cost of permitting teens abortion. No state requires parental consent for prenatal and delivery services. If teen can consent to services related to childbirth, a far more dangerous procedure than abortion. There can be no health-related reason for denying the right to consent on their own to abortion. Advantage 1 is domestic violence. Parental consent laws greatly increase the risk of domestic violence. Empirics show. NARAL 15. Most young women fear that they would be physically or emotionally abused if forced to disclose their pregnancy. A young woman who does not involve a parent in her decision comes from a family where government-mandated disclosure would have devastating effects. Research shows that family violence is worse during family members' pregnancy. Half of teens who have a history of abuse report being assaulted during pregnancy. Near notification pregnancy is a flashpoint for violence within family. A 13-year-old was shot to death by her father after she learned she was to terminate a pregnancy caused by his acts of incest. And gender-based violence perpetuates an oppressive patriarchal hierarchy. Needs RACO 97. Gender-based violence reflects the existing age between the power relationships and perpetuates the subordination and devaluation of the women. This violence exists within patriarchy that engenders practices which deny women their rights and reproduce the existing imbalance between sexes. Advantage 2 is no more coding or abortions. Parental involvement laws delay abortion but jeopardize women's lives. ACLU 15. Restricting teens' access to abortion causes delays following enactment of parental consent. Second trimester abortions increase 70%. Later abortions entail more medical risks and are difficult to obtain because they are more expensive and few doctors perform them. Parental involvement can lead to teens suffering physical, educational, emotional, economic, and social costs of teenage childbearing. And teenage abortions are inevitable. The question is whether we want them performed in hospitals or underground clinics. NARAL 15. Parental consent law to endanger women's health by forcing women to turn to illegal or self-induced abortion. Minors may be driven to desperate measures to maintain confidentiality. Secrecy is one of the leading reasons for illegal abortion deaths since 1973. If we don't ensure access to confidential care, teenagers will stop seeking the care that they need. Advantage 3 is poverty. Teenage pregnancy destroys career prospects and reifies the cycle of poverty. NARAL 15. Forced childbearing that can result from parental consent have devastating effects on health and life chances of women and their children. 4 in 10 teen mothers graduate from high school and 2% graduate college. 41% who gave birth before 20 were living in poverty within the first year of the child's birth. Chances of living in poverty rose to 15% when their child reached the age of 3. Infants of teen mothers are 25% more likely to suffer from low birth weight. Children of teenage parents have an increased risk of abuse and are more likely to become teenage parents themselves, thus perpetuating the cycle of poverty. And impoverished women are the most susceptible to domestic violence. RISO 1. Violence and abuse have immediate traumatic effects on the mental and physical health of all women, and they account for 1/3 visits to the emergency room by women. Women who had poor families experience extreme levels of physical and sexual abuse. 83% of low-income women were found to be victims of violence. Homelessness is associated with domestic violence. Poor women are at especially high risk for assaults. And economic independence is an essential component of women empowerment. UN Women 10. Promote women's economic independence and eradicate poverty on women, ensuring equal access for women is means to empower women and end social subordination. The standard is empowering women. Abstract theoretical critiques of the rule of the oppression individuals must make concrete political change in order to end exploitation. Ratner 11. The battle to improve the concrete is the battle to eliminate exploitation. The concrete is exploited. The way to obscure exploitation is to obscure the concrete. The ruling class and the populace thus have anti-ethical political goals. Politics needs to comprehend concrete because that is the locus of exploitation which must be transformed. And theoretical critique is insufficient. Our discussion should be based around finding policies, changes in the empirical world that can both reorient our values and change changeable conditions of oppression. Curry 14. Despite the pronouncement of debate as an activity pointing to the real world consequences when addressing sexism discussions surface to the conquest of one ideal theory over the other, the chasm between what emerges as actual and the problems in the world, e.g. sexism, and how we frame such problems theoretically is the call for an anti-ethical paradigm. This gap between what is actual and what is represented by theories of debaters funds any real discussion about the concrete nature of oppression which necessitate tangible policies. Theoretical endorsements make us aware of the problems in our world, but do not commit us to do X. And analyzing gender-based violence in an academic environment is key to reaching gender equality. UNESCO 15. Gender-based violence affects women, homosexual, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people, teachers, and learners to be both perpetuators and victims of gender violence. Awareness raising and sensitization needs to target the entire population. Developing educational content and practices to promote gender equality and tolerance is necessary so students learn how to protect themselves and others. They need to acquire relevant knowledge to promote gender equality in the classroom, and any conception of equality must recognize the importance of reproductive rights. Reproductive freedom is a prerequisite to human worth. Alvarez 09. Each of us has human rights that underpin our ability to live with dignity and lead a fulfilling life. If a woman is to make decisions, she must be able to control her reproductive life. Reproductive freedom lies at the heart of human dignity, self-determination, and equality. When a woman is denied her reproductive life or safe abortion, she's denied the means to direct her own life. And traditional systems of ethics overlook and devalue the unique problems that affect women. This calls for a new ethic that deconstructs patriarchal approaches to moral deliberation. Tong 14. Feminist ethics rethink traditional ethics to the extent that it devalues women's moral experience. Traditional ethics show less concern for women as opposed to men's issues and interests. It implies that women are not as morally mature as men. Traditional ethics overrates culturally masculine traits and underrates feminine traits. It favors males' ways of moral reasoning. Feminists have developed a gender-centered approach to ethics that eliminates the oppression of any group of people, but most particularly women. And gender violence has historically been depoliticized and privatized. It's always external normative impact calculus, both inside and outside of debate. Thus, you must prioritize the slow violence that has been erased in the conversation about high politics. Shepard, Hughes, and Bourgeois 4. Attention to the low violence and structures of everyday life shifts our attention to the pathologies of gender inequalities refers to the ease with which humans are capable of reducing the socially vulnerable into expendable non-persons. These invisible genocides are hidden from view. The things that are hardest to perceive are right before our eyes. We need to exercise hypervigilance for the less dramatic everyday acts of violence that render gender participation in genocidal acts and policies possible. Mass violence and genocide are ingrained in the common sense of everyday life. They harbor the prime to push social consensus toward devaluing life to the militarization of everyday life. Thus you affirm. I didn't read Gilligan 82, which should be included.
The last
part. Yeah.
Okay, that's cool. Everybody ready?
Yep.
Cool. Okay, so what is a woman?
What is a what?
What is a woman?
I don't define what a woman is. I think you can self-identify as a woman.
So do your authors come to that same conclusion?
I'm not sure.
You're not sure?
No.
Okay. Then what does it mean to abstract?
Abstract?
Mm-hmm.
In what context?
Curry.
Curry, okay. Where does he use the word abstract?
Well, one of your cards talks about abstraction, right? Ratner.
Ratner.
We give abstract theoretical critique as a tool of the oppressor.
Okay, so I think that he uses abstract in opposition to concrete political change. So anything that would tell us to rethink.
So denying the state is abstraction.
I would contextualize abstract to mean not a concrete political change.
Okay, cool. Now, why is this a tool of the oppressor? And if it is, why does it have to be?
Okay, so the reason why abstract theoretical critique is a tool of the oppressor is because we use this as a way to get out of actually solving for oppression. So in order
Why is that always true? It seems that it speaks about the normative conception of what the state or the political smear has always done. If the negative is a move away from that, if the negative is a different kind of abstraction than what is normally done, how would this implicate the negative?
I think it's hard for me to answer the question without knowing the different kind of abstraction that you're claiming.
Okay, cool. It's going to be Deleuze.
I don't know what Deleuze says.
So Deleuze's understanding is the idea that things are fluid and we should exist outside of the state. With that link to the idea of abstraction.
I think it's hard to know, with this, beyond that warrant.
Okay, cool. So your advantage 2 talks about how parental involvement laws delay abortions, and then it says teenage abortions are inevitable. Where do you have solvency for this advantage?
What's the warrant in the car?
No, where is the solvency?
Solvency and disadvantage?
Yeah, and the advantage 2.
Okay, yeah. So this talks about how parental involvement laws, teenage abortions are going to happen anyways. So if I don't have to consult my parents and I can go.
Yeah, but where is your evidence that says that you stop these underground clinics from happening?
Okay,
I'm not just going to grant you that this is going to happen. Do you have evidence that says it's going to happen?
So that would be the if the evidence warrants that the reason why this is happening is because of the parental involvement law. So if these are abolished, then there would be no reason to go to an underground clinic.
Policies are pretty complex, right? Just because I repeal a law that's I repeal a law that says segregation is a thing didn't stop segregation, right? There's way more to politics than that. So am I supposed to just grant you the idea that your advantage 2 has some form of solvency?
So I
because
think the
you're the
example that you
alternative?
gave is a little different, right? So the reason why segregation wasn't solved is because
How is it? Okay, I understand that those are different conceptions, but it seems to be they're both based on racism, patriarchy, which I think would flow along the same lines. But okay, let's start pro now. 45 seconds. One off. AC.
And you'll pass me pages?
Yep.
And you'll like pass them as you read, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Here. Here's your flasher. By the way, it doesn't have anything on it, but it's not going to affect you.
Okay, thanks.
Are we ready? Legal or political conception of person to exclude black and queer bodies and instills white heteronormative conception of humanity that destroys what cannot exist outside of it. Wheelie 14. We need an alternative legal conception of person with the dominating focus and inclusion based on narrow framework and pertains to anti-discrimination, not only hinders the eradication of violence against trans people and other vulnerable populations, but also creates a condition of possibility for the continual equal distribution of life. Unequal distribution of life changes the willingly delimited notion of personhood as property to zeros comparatively on one form of education, the expense of the others, thus aligning for the continued existence of hierarchical difference to make claims for the inclusion of reviews of view from the law itself that has thoroughly violently endorsement of racialized slavery, and it continues to be one of the chief instruments in creating and maintaining the racialized assemblage of the World Counteract, calls for radical politics that articulate from the impossible worldview of the trans-political existence, articulation of assemblage, and movement to abolish the ground of plastification, and the sexualization of the queers outside the norms of liberalism, place the queers as sexually deviant other that is completely outside of society. This creates an assimilation of the queer with liberal understanding of the personhood that demobilizes queer politics and federal rights heteronormativity. Puar 07. Sexual deviancy is linked to the process of quarantining terrorist bodies, signaling enforcing patriotism. The emasculated terrorist is not only mere than other, but a barometer of immorality involved in disciplinary apparatus. September 11 facilitated consolidation. The consolidation reflected radicalization where members of the group are identified as terrorists and disidentified as citizens. This identification is the process of sexualization of low radicalization. The terrorist figure must appear improperly radicalized outside the norms of multiculturalism and perversely sexualized in order to materialize as terrorists in the first place. The war on terror has responsibility in some queers to U.S. national citizenship with the spatial territorial domain as homo-nationals, homo-narrativities, and new neoliberal sexual politics that hinge upon the possibility of demobilized gay constituency and privatized demobilized gay culture that are to domesticity and consumption. We see the fortification of normativity, normative heterosexual coupling, and the propagation of sexualities, the resistance to normativity. These proliferating sexualities complicate the economist implications of casting the nation as only support of reductive heteronormativity, always repulsive of homosexuality. The terrorist is one discourse attack that disintegrates the nation's gays and queers from radical sexual others for grinding homo-nationalism with these perverse bodies, reiterating heterosexuality is the norm, but also contain certain domestic heterosexual bodies, provide ammunition, reinforce national politics. Also, this is another link to the affirmative, especially when her plan text utilizes the United States federal government. The poor evidence is extremely skeptical the way that the United States federal government engages in this kind of politics. Then, therefore, the alternative is the queer suicide bomber. The action of the suicide bomber is an unintelligible to static understandings of what it means to live and die and exist. The affirmative, an affirmation that the suicide bombers are queer is a movement from static to fluid, a movement from material understanding that which is incomprehensible, not quite understandable. This intelligibility is not a refusal to understand and comprehend, but instead a leaving open the possibility to never find a static conclusion. Puar 07. Why is it the suicide bomber cannot be talked about without being condemned first? My desire here is to momentarily suspend this dilemma of combining analysis of the representational stakes that of forces of affective body and matter. Body should be together from metal and flesh and assembled with the organic and inorganic body, not of the self nor of the other, but both simultaneously, perhaps more accurately, destiny that obliterates the dialectical altogether. Self-annihilation acts of self-preservation, the preservation of symbolic self, enabled to the highest cultural capital of martyrdom. Suicide bombers are a sign of life, emanating from the violent conditions of life and possibility, of making life the body's force, the reconciliation, the opposite, the inevitable collapse of separation, habitation of contradiction, and the candidate for martyrdom transforms her body into a weapon or a mass that hides the soon-to-be detonated weapon, conceals it in forms part of the body. The body is not simply a weapon, the body is transformed into a weapon, not in a metaphorical sense, but a truly ballistic sense. A temporal narrative of progression, upturn to death, and becoming turns into one body. Once one body size, one body becomes a mask weapon. The suicide bomber, suicide resistance, a message inscribed in the body with no other means will get through, cut it through, it's marked. And the role of the ballot is to vote for who best performably and methodologically engages in queer unintelligibility. The world consists through making all things incodable and understandable, causing homogenization which destroys difference and produces meaninglessness. Yet the nature of metaphors that exposes itself to those who experience it and maintains ambiguity as to how this relationship is constituted. The true negatives are taking a symbolic metaphor is a poetic affirmation akin to suicide bomber's destruction of the intelligibility that allows it to retain possibility of prevents the disappearance of meaning for Nano 10. Poetry is exposing itself to the possibility of rationality, while relationality while maintaining the ambiguity has the exact nature of that possibility metaphor is disappearing. This is due to when everything is like everything else, one can no longer distinguish between the others any longer. Is this lack that results in it disappearing into another. It is a metaphor that doesn't allow them to sink into one another, to equate with one another, prevents them from disappearing into other nothingness. It might be momentarily disturbing to consider the suicide bomber in this light. It's one that reminds us of an impossibility. One was willing to consider this possibility, while never resting in finality. All one can do at this point is positive possibility of the suicide bomber and a reminder of these times and answers. Then let's go to the affirmative. First, starting at the top. Starting at the top. The negative breaks down the understanding of the body that makes the denial of abortion impossible. This means that we are the necessary prerequisite, the negative, or the affirmative. The idea of the affirmative is based on the understanding of the woman's body as something in patriarchy, but we are a necessary prerequisite that allows not only open space to other individuals, but also an open of unintelligibility that allows the body to be something that is transcended, not just exists within it. Then on the advantage one, on the advantage one, I turn the entirety of advantage one. She talks about parental consent laws greatly and increase the risk of domestic violence. Domestic violence in general, praise suppression, perpetually oppressive patriarchal ideals, but is going to be, if I'm winning heteronormativity terms, I mean she's not going to be winning this debate. Then on the advantage two, she has no solvency of the advantage. Do not grant it to her. This is terminal D on the question.
question because she does not actually read anything that says this will happen. Policies are complicated often. Do not give her credence just because she is the opposite of what's happening in the status quo. The advantage 3 says it destroys career prospects and redefies cycles of poverty. She does not read evidence either on here about how economic independence is solved by the idea of having this kind of understanding, which means that you do not give her credence on this. Even if she says she's solving poverty, that does not mean that she's going to be solving economic independence because job loss is something that happens too. And it also means that her cry to economics is probably a link to the negative because the idea that we should only identify through economic and political understandings is exactly what the wheelie evidence indicates. It's the link to the idea of the exclusion of queer persons of color. Then on the standard of empowering women, she's going to go for abstraction bad. She needs to be back to state bad offense that I read in the NC to be able to have that in the debate. Then on the Ratner 11 evidence, I'm not normative abstraction. Our evidence indicates a movement in unintelligibility that has not been done before, which means that our argument is talking about the normative conception of statehood. We are not normative conception of statehood. We are blowing of that up, which means it's going to be a question of her being able to articulate links, which I don't think her evidence is going to be able to do. 2, abstraction good is a necessary for non-political bodies are really a link evidence indicates that this is the only way that certain trans bodies can exist in the space in a way that we can actually push the trans narrative into something that actually exists in the realm of the realm of like acceptability. And 3, we are not abstraction, we are affect. It means that affect is a biological continuum that makes it the way in which we understand things. Puar 7. No matter how intersectional methods of subjectivity, these formulations will still limit us. Affect is biological phenomenon, state why bodily matters why escapes or maintains outside discursively structured, thus commonly forms of feeling. Affect escapes our attention to the haunts of representational realm. Affect is synthetic, implying a participation in the sense that the other may third or escape the universe will not be potential. The autonomy is the autonomy of affect. That means that there is no abstraction link here. Then on the also, 4, give the new 2 and one of our new answers. She can't apply this to the negative when I give it to her in cross-sex, and there is no articulation, which means I should be able to answer the implication that she draws off of it. Then on the Curry card. When we are not theoretical, we are engaging in identity through assemblies that is necessary. That means that we do not answer we do not argue the Curry evidence. Matter of fact, we also control the internal link to the question of Curry because we are solving back to the question of the excluded people of color that she does not talk about. Then on the last card about we should prioritize material violence. 1, violence not always material. This is exactly what our link evidence indicates, and the reason why you're going to lose this debate is because the idea that we can always focus on material violence excludes that which is non-material. There are some things of rational violence. Humanist articulation that are found in rationality and reason cannot account for the irrational nature of queer violence that society is built upon. This is necessary in the context of life. So this is also necessary in the context of rights. Solution can only be found outside the normal context of life and death. Warren 13. The problematic invites us to consider the functionality of violence and the inequity of the humanist instrument to address this violation, e.g. rights. 1, life cannot rely on rational instruments. It resolve the irrational dilemma, especially when these instruments depend on the irrationality to sustain them. The horror of overkill, not so much as spectacular violence, but that the solution required to this problem would also have to reason outside of the normative times of life and death, outside of reason itself. Overkill is the violence that sustains society without a liberal democracy, and temptation to to this. And that internal link to the question of her solvency, and also the entire term of the affirmative. Then the last evidence I'll read the name of this links to the USFG. This is just an extra card. In the face of unknowability of queer bodies, the state catalogs the unknowable through names such as terrorists that produce new structures of normativity and exceptionalism. Puar 07. Homosexuals have been traitors to the nation, figures of espionage associated with communists, and as with suicide bombers, bring on their desire and death. The recent extirpations place gay marriage is the worst form of terrorism of gay couples as domestic terrorists. The person masculinity most rapidly disseminating globalized to the war and terrorism or terrorist masculinities. These emancipated bodies have like femininity as the reference point of the malfunction or metaphysically tied to all sorts of pathologies of man and body, homosexuality, incest, pedophilia, madness, and disease. The queer physicality of the terrorist monsters haunting the U.S. State Department counter-terror website. The terrorists is completely an unfathomable, unknowable, and hysterical monstrosity. Yet, though one exceptional candidate, the U.S. intelligence terrorist and coordination simulates and effuges discomfort and unknowable bodies, thus effectively producing human activities and exceptionalism through the category of the unknowability. Not that if we should engage in the practice. Do you have a pen? Can I use your pen for 1 second to mark that?
Oh, sure.
Just mark practice. Yes, practice. There it is.
All right, can I have the paper?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
All right, it's fine.
Just 1 second, I need a drink.
Oh, sure. All right, cross-X?
Yep.
Okay. So, how many links do you read just from the K?
Like just on the K flow?
Yeah.
I would say the first evidence indicates a link and the second evidence indicates a link.
Oh, wait, actually, first, what's the status of the K?
Unconditional.
Okay. So, what's the first link?
Yeah, the way the evidence indicates that legal conceptions of personhood and like the way in which the state understands personhood is through like legal conceptions and political conceptions.
Okay, where in the AF do I try to understand conception of personhood?
You defend the United States federal government enacting a policy to ban abortion.
Right. That's the state taking an action.
Yeah,
Why
it's
is
a
that the
legal
state
conception. Like you first have to categorize those bodies as those individuals that you were repealing these laws against, right?
Okay, what does it mean to categorize bodies?
I think that to categorize bodies is just to label bodies, right? It's like not necessarily labeling, but like a normative projection onto them of something that.
Okay, how do we not label bodies?
Through unintelligibility.
What is that?
It is the refusal to know.
So don't you label bodies by saying queer bodies and the black body?
Yeah. So I don't think that is the same kind of thing, right?
Why?
So the idea of queerness is a state like a property. It's something that Puar defines not as like necessarily a identity. It necessarily is not an identity. It's a status. It's like a condition.
Okay, so in the AF, what categorization occurs? Like, is it through discourse?
I think that it's through like your evidence. Also, I think it's through
what? Like read me a section. Like read me the word and the evidence that categorizes.
I'm not going to read you a word in the evidence, but your evidence talks about like policy options. I think the evidence is pretty. the evidence is good enough to link to the idea that the young women and conceptions of state of people of color exclude the idea of the trans body. It says that even working within these kind of political notions and not moving away from these, it even says specifically that the only alternative is to have like a radical removal of an intelligibility. Huh?
What's the second link?
I think the impact evidence is probably linked to. That's the Puar 07 evidence, first piece.
Okay, so like what is it?
Yeah, so the argument it makes is that the idea of like helping queer bodies through the, or helping like, I think even probably feminine bodies through the idea of the state is something that causes homo-nationalism. And what Puar means by that is that it is the pacification of the gay populace through like inscribing them.
What does that mean?
Yeah, I was just about to explain. It's the inscribing of them within the state apparatus, right? So it's like the idea of gay marriage to fix the idea of heteronormativity, but that just like pacifies gay resistance.
Okay, what's the other link?
Those are the two links. I mean, I guess there's probably links in a lot of the evidence.
That's
honestly.
fine. So let's talk about the alt. What is a queer suicide bomber?
Yeah, Puar indicates that it is not a queer person committing suicide, but it is the status of the act of suicide bombing that is queer.
What is that? What is suicide bombing?
Well, one straps a bond to them.
So it's like a physical...
Yeah, it is not an action of doing that, right?
Okay,
It's
and
a
then
reflection upon the figure.
What does this solve?
It solves through the links and the impacts through
Like how does it solve?
Yes, it refuses to place identification categories and it moves into the realm of affect, idea of intensity and feeling and things like that.
How?
Well, through its contemplation of the like act of the explosion of the suicide bomber and things like that.
Okay. So the AF is bad because it excludes trans bodies, right?
Yeah, and trans people of color.
Okay, got it. What's the second link again?
That was the Puar evidence, and it talks about the way in which like the United States federal government causes homo-nationalism.
What's homo-nationalism again?
It
Sorry.
is the idea that it is a like quelling of the gay populace through like trying to integrate them into society.
Can you explain that more?
Yeah. So like she talks about things like when we're passing laws or when we're trying to like we basically make queerness heteronormative through making it like something that exists within the state apparatus, but something that is basically still quantified in a heteronormative way.
Okay. Okay, I have 55 seconds left. The order's going to be AC, K. Ready?
No.
Like, where is it starting on the AF?
Like top down. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Okay. You did not spend enough time here on the solvency, so first extend the plaintiffs to said that the United States federal government should abolish parental involvement laws, and the only reason that you give to not do this is that the links to the K. However, your links are terribly unspecific. They talk about how all state action is bad, but you never talk about why my specific advocacy is categorizing something that would exclude queer and queer bodies. So thus the only reason besides like no solvency arguments you give to reject the AF, which means that like as I prove that I don't link the AF or I don't link the K. There's no reason why you shouldn't do the advocacy. So first off advantage one, you say that the heteronormativity turns, but I'll get to that. Off advantage two, you say that there's no solvency, but guess there's solvency as the second evidence in the advantage narrow 15 talks about how the reason why ACO, Nero 15 talks about how, like, with parental consent, or that teenage abortions are inevitable. The reason why they're happening in underground clinics right now is because of these parental involvement laws, which means that abolishing these parental involvement laws, which means that there'd be no reason for them to be performed in underground clinics. So there is solvency. So extend advantage 2. Next on advantage 3, you said there's no solvency. There's also like other economic reasons why these women are poor. However, it talks about how the teenage pregnancy is a main reason why there is why there's like a cycle of poverty, which means that preventing teenage policy through abolishing the parental involvement laws would solve for the majority of this. Sure, I don't solve for 100% of poverty, but I do solve for a main reason for this. That's coming out of the NARO 15 evidence, so extend that. Next, on framework, you say, actually, let's go to the K. So, first, no link to the K. The AF the AF does take a policy action, but your evidence is only specific to why all policy action is bad, not the specific. You say policy action is bad because it categorizes bodies. However, you don't even give me in context a reason why the AF categorizes body. You say, oh, it's clear in the evidence. No, it's not. I asked you to read me a sentence or a line from which my evidence categorizes bodies, and there isn't. If anything, you link because you keep categorizing bodies as queer and as queer or black bodies. The AF doesn't do this. Also, too, no link. You say that the AF is bad because it excludes queer and queer bodies are people of color, but extend Hayes 13 talks about a reason why the parental involvement laws are so bad is because they're disproportionately affecting women of color. This means that I do put emphasis on on people of color, and there is I do care about them. Also, extend extend the UNESCO 15 evidence, which talks about how analyzing gender inequality is especially bad because not only that affects women, it also affects homosexuals, lesbians, and bisexual and transgender people. This means that through the action of fighting patriarchy, we're actually going to be benefiting the trans people and other people who you omit in your discussion. So no link because of that. Also 3, you say that I don't talk about, or that my AF excludes trans people, but no link. I specifically wrote women with an X instead of an A to embrace the trans movement. Even if it's not currently possible for trans women to bear children, there are still some studies about it. So these women have been included in the discussion about abortion rights. It's also just a nod to the harms caused by categorization. Even if I can't solve for all those harms in one speech, I'm acknowledging that there's still work left to do, which means that I don't link to this exclusion of trans people. Also, 4, you categorize as well because of you call them and identify them as black and queer bodies. Also 5, you say that we shouldn't take state action that's actually tangible. It helps helps women in conditions of oppression. Your alternative does nothing. You try to rethink. You say that we should the queer suicide bomber, but the queer suicide bomber all has no warrant, and absent any links to the perm, absent any links to the alt or the K, you can perm do both. The net benefit of the Shepherd Hughes evidence, which talks about how it talks about how we need to reject gender violence right away and perm double bind. Rather, the AF is too big of an instance of the bad impacts you talk about to solve, or it's a very drop in the bucket, which means that we can just do AF then neg, and then it'll solve back for all of the impacts you talk about. Also, I should be able to weigh the AF.
So are you gonna use that during prep, or can I have my case?
Oh, you can have it.
Okay. And I have how much time do I have left?
45 seconds.
45. Okay, ready. with an overview on the link debate. Down the K. Down the F.
Straight in the order.
Sorry, K. Top down. Or K with an overview on the link debate, then down. Everybody ready?
I didn't do a good job in cross-check, so I'm going to make this link debate extremely clear. I have 2 links. One, the white evidence indicates that the only alternative to doing anything that does not link to the idea of the political notion of personhood is through the unintelligible trans existence is not an argument that just pertains to whether or not you are a policy that particularly implicates this, but a question of policy in general. We need to move outside of the little section of personhood. This is why it's radical, why she cannot comprehend it, and the question of how the link actually links to her. The idea is that we should completely defragmentize the idea of the political existence in the first place. We need to move into the kind of almost non-human realm of the assemblage that exists outside of these political notions of personhood that existed before. That means we need to move into the direction of the unintelligible that never existed before, and a non-normative impact that is a conceded link into the question of the analysis that she does not do. The second link is our Puar evidence. You do not do a good job answering the internal links of the evidence. It talks about how sexual deviancy is linked to the process of quarantine terrorist bodies and the way in which the United States federal government engaged in this kind of consolidation reflects on the idea that it categorizes certain groups of individuals as terrorists and says they're about this is a link to the state in general. It does not matter whether or not you're referring to something specific to the question of the state. The link is probably not that great, but the question is not a question of whether or not it's specific to your evidence. You do not do any weighing as why you should get terminal defense on this question if you are going to be something that is specific, but it still links to the question of the United States federal government in general. She does not do enough work on why she does not link to the United States federal government and why she's negative state action. Do not let her make that argument in the 2AR, which means that she is still a positive state action as per her link evidence that I'm framing this debate on. That means I'm winning 100% risk of linking. There's going to be no offense on her question of her no link evidence. Then I'll go to the line by line of her no link evidence. First, she says no link. Your evidence is specific to a policy option. You do not give me why my affirmative categorization of bodies. I just gave you 2 reasons. And also, I'll give you a 3rd reason real quick. Sorry. The idea of identity is something that links to the affirmative. The link to the negative. The idea of identity is something that she satisfies herself on. She says that we are conception of women. We are moving towards abortion. Or a claim to the feminist identity. Something that the link evidence indicates is probably bad because the idea of the identity is something that cannot allow us to move to assemblage. And it's also what our Wiley evidence indicates. Then she says that you do not give me. I asked you to read me piece of evidence. I just clarified that. The second no link. She said exclude queer body, but it hates the plant helps persons of color. But this is not a question of whether or not your plan talks about persons of color, but a question of what your plan actually does for persons of color, and how your political action, the way in which you represent the political space, actually engaging persons of color. This means that you are just showing me again that I turn your entire affirmative because the idea that you can help queer persons of color does not actually help because the way in which you do that is through irrational queer violence, which I'll get to the bottom of the matter of fact, we can just cross-apply that here. The evidence I read in the 2 and the 1NC is really good in this question. They talk about how irrational queer violence happens to bodies of color. The Warren 13 evidence says that humanist articulations that are found in rationality and reason cannot account for the irrational nature of queer violence that society is built upon. This is especially true in the context of right, which is another link evidence to the question of this particular impact, which should be an independent voting issue because it turns the entirety of the affirmative and means that she gets no net benefits from this question because the idea still hurts persons of color and actually re-entrenches the idea of humanist articulations re-entrench structural violence. Turns the entire F, that's dropped, that was at the bottom of the F. Now, she tries to cross the UNED's evidence says the AF action is benefiting trans people. The AF action is something that's productive. That is not no link argument. That is at least terminal defense of the question, but I'm going to be winning impact turns by winning link evidence. Then, so she says no link. She uses woman. That is not a link. That is not answering our links either. Just because you do something does not mean that you do something that resolves our link. She does not make defensive claims to this question either. She does not frame this in the right way, and you should not let her do it in the 2AR. Then she says that, okay, so let's extend the offense. I've already seen the link analysis. The Whitley evidence indicates that the idea of understanding things political perception of personhood excludes queer bodies. Then the Puar 07 evidence is the impact evidence. She concedes that it reinstills homonationalism. The affirmative reinstills homonationalism because it causes the persecution of queer bodies through heteronormativity. The idea that we can pacify the gay subject is something that exists within civil society, but something that can always be pacified within civil society. Something that instills the idea of homosexuality as something that is heteronormative through the staged assemblage, which means that this turns the entirety of the affirmative replicates the idea that she's talking about through heteronormativity. Also, she's conceded the alternative evidence. She said that you do nothing. She does not have any warrant as to why I do not have warrant for this question. I explained her in crosses. I'll explain it again. The reason why the alternative resolves and links. You should give me 100% risk on this evidence. She's not answered the internal war. The Puar evidence indicates that the reflection of the queer suicide bomber is a movement from the idea of just the body into something that is alteric and exists in between that. For example, the mixing of metal and flesh, the reflection of the queer suicide bomber is something that breaks down this kind of normative distinction that exists. It also means the alternative is the queer suicide bomber, the effective reflection on the suicide bomber that moves away from normativity and notability. This is uniquely key. Also, she says permutation do both. The shepherd uses the net benefit, but she won the first disadd to the both perms. First disadd. First, the state is in disadvantage. All the states in our offense I read can be cross-applied here. The idea that the affirmative still engaged in the state is something that's going to be a net disadvantage. Reason why it doesn't co-ops the ability for the negative to solve. The second reason that you cannot permutation do both is the Fernando evidence of the role about that she does not answer at all. It says knowingness causes meaninglessness in metaphor. It gives this kind of idea. Her idea that she wants to reinscribe lines within permutations is not something that allows us to have no ability, but instead it allows us to have the idea of everything knowing this question with meaninglessness and turns the entirety of the permutation because the permutation results in a nihilistic meaninglessness that cannot actually do anything. This also implicates her affirmative because this is an independent voting issue that she's conceived the rule about us to vote for who by performing that logically engaged in queer unintelligibility. She's not doing analysis on why her offense links to this framing, which means I am going to be winning that question. The Fernando 10 evidence indicates that knowing not something causes nothingness, and metaphor escapes that, so she's going to lose that debate there. That means that the perms double blind drop even if she's not going to be winning a permutation, because the idea of a permutation, she has to beat back the state disads, because she's still doing the state. She doesn't do any analysis at all on why the perms resolve the links. Don't let her do that in the 2AR. Also means that the Fernando evidence co-ops that the method of permutation, of knowing two things and putting them together, is something that Fernando says is bad. Let's go to the F. Straight at the top. She's dropped the analysis at the very top of the NC. The negatives are breakdown the understanding of the body that makes the denial of abortion impossible. This means that makes the denial of abortion possible. This means that the negative is necessary prerequisite to doing the affirmative at all. This is the first argument I made in the NC. She completely dropped it. It means I can turn the link to the question of the affirmative. It means you have to vote negative to be able to do the affirmative. Then she says you can send the plan. She should abolish the parental involvement. She said my links are unspecific. You do not talk about this specific reason. I already answered this on the NC. Then she says that Nora 15 says reason why things are happening because of the parental involvement. This is the advantage too. Sorry. She says no reason for that to happen, but she does not answer my arguments. She just reinstates her argument. The idea that things didn't happen does not mean that it's going to. Policy options are complicated. You do not have any solvency on this evidence. She also doesn't have the internal link to her advantage 3. She also doesn't really extend any offense. Don't give her ghost extensions, which means she has no offense. Now let's go to the actual standard. She only said one piece of evidence on this. She said that the AF is the benefit of trans people because AF action is something that's productive. And she says there's no link argument. It's not a no link argument. It also is in turn the entire affirmative. The idea that our Whitley evidence is the turn on this that I read on this, and the idea of the affect and the Puar evidence is something that is going to control the internal link that's off. And she's conceded that the idea that we control the internal link is the question of abstraction and the question of how we actually understand analyzation of material structures. Material structures are not enough because the unintelligible queer violence means that it is a disadd to her methodology. Is also a reason why you vote negative because the idea of affect as per our Puar evidence controls the way in which biological motives function, which means it's not abstraction and is the fundamental basis of everything. Affect is the basis of the way in which we understand things. It means neg controls the internal link. Permutations are not articulated at all. Do not give her credence on that.
Alright. I have 55 seconds. Okay. Alright. So the order's gonna be overview and then ACK. Okay.
Where do I flow the overview?
You can put it on the app.
Okay.
Alright. Is everyone ready? Okay. The biggest problem is last speech is not doing enough with the perp double-blind argument, which literally solves for all of the arguments he makes. He makes his argument that I'm like not doing enough with the link work, but even if that's true, the perm double-blind would solve for this. The perm double-blind is that rather the AF is too big of an instance of too big of an instance of categorization that he claims is bad. So the alt wouldn't solve anyways, which means you're going to be voting off the Shepard Hughes argument, which talks about why we have to reject gender violence right away. And the UNESCO evidence is a net benefit, or the AF is like too small of an instance of categorization, which means that the alt could just be passed as primary or like secondary to the AF, which would also which would mean that it would solve for all the the bad impacts. Again, the net benefit is like a Shepard Hughes and UNESCO evidence. So first start on the AC. The only reason he gives you to be negating off of the negating off the AF is because of the link argument to the K. However, the conception of the double blind means that this strategy was completely flawed because if I'm saying the links would be solved for through the permutation, which means that you can extend re-extend the plaintiffs of the United States federal government ought to or should abolish parental involvement laws and the advantage to again his only arguments about why advantage 2 and advantage 3 are flawed is because they're insolvency. However, the both advantage 2 and advantage 3 identify the problem that the women are going through is that they're that they have to undergo these parental consent laws in order to receive abortions. That this is the main reason why they are looking to back abortions which are threatening their safety, and that's the reason why they're impoverished is because when they can't get an abortion, this means they are have to or forced into teenage pregnancy, which is really bad because it ruins their chance of or because it statistically means that they are going to be more likely impoverished. So this is so yeah. Also now go on to the K. the contextualization I get out of cross-sex that the reason why the app is bad is because it's taking a policy action, and the policy action is exclusionary to like trans people of color. However, he tries to however, again, his link, I don't think because his link is terribly unspecific. He tries to talk about all policy action in general. He doesn't give me a reason why my specific policy action is bad or triggering the negative effects. Also, he says or also you can extend the arguments I make about why I don't like this because one, the app is extremely inclusive to trans people. This is why I didn't use the A, the word woman. I used the X in this to embrace transgender people. And also you can re-extend the his 13 evidence which talks about why this why abortion is or why parental confinement laws are bad is because they're disproportionately affect women of color. Also, you can re-extend UNESCO, which talks about the bad impacts of patriarchy and how they affect all different types of gender identities, not just like one specific one, which means I don't link to the K. But even if I did, but the perm would solve. So even if you do by the third some link, again the perm would solve, or it doesn't solve, in which you vote off of Shepard Hughes, which talk about why we need to prioritize gender violence right now and solve for it, which means that you affirm.
You're out.
Do you mind if I take a walk just real quick?
Go for it.
Okay, thanks.
Can I see Shepard Hughes?
Yeah.
Are y'all gonna need the evidence before I leave?
No.
Okay. If you do, it's just right here. persons of color.
Yeah.
I butchered this name.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's fine.
done with the F?
Yeah.
Cool. Is there a flight 2 in this room?
Yes.
Who are you meeting?
Lobo O'Connor.
Second season as a junior. Congrats.
Who's top seed? You look for it. Okay.
He's getting the mallet too.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
What
We
happened?
think that he's first and I'm second.
Who else?
New Puar.
Oh, okay.
What did you say? He's what? She in the restroom?
We getting mallet.
Yeah, she said she'd be right back. We can play 3 seeds, but I think
That's right. At least that's what we think.
Well, I'd like to wait. Alright. Congratulations. We have a 2-1 for the negative from Millard North.
Okay, so that means that I sat. So I agree that the affirmative and the permutation probably link to the critique, but I vote affirmative on the argument that if the alternative isn't sufficient to overcome the link when combined with the plan, then it probably won't be sufficient to solve for real world instances of like women who are suffering from like domestic violence and abortion and stuff like that. I don't think it would solve the plan, so you make the argument that it will solve the plan, like vote Nick, vote F. I don't buy that. The Fernando evidence was dropped, but that evidence was just an argument that means the firm couldn't solve, but you still continue to make arguments that the links to the perm are so strong that there's no way that the perm could ever solve K, and you don't answer the other half to double bind. So I think that makes it pretty clear to me that the alternative probably won't be able to overcome real world instances, because you make it very clear that like it's, and you also are not very specific with your link. You're like, it's the problem is the entire USFG. So it's like, if you can't overcome this one policy USFG is doing, how is your alternative going to have enough solvency to like solve further? The USFG passes policies like every day, you know. So I just don't see any solvency story. With that said, so I feel like the 2AR, I feel like we should go harder on this argument. So I feel like you could save time by conceding the arguments about the state links. I just don't think that you're going to win the link debate. So concede the arguments about the state links and then explain how other state action is inevitable instead of continuing with the link defense. Because you make the arguments that the links aren't specific, but then you don't take it the extra step to say that like other instances would make it inevitable. And yeah, and then yeah, this is also just why specific links are key. If you make a specific link, then there aren't other instances of the alternative is responsible for solving in order to solve the impact.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Okay, so I voted nag because I think that the 1AR radically mishandles the link debate. A lot of the arguments are discounted by the nega's defense, and then the few arguments that you try to re-extend as no links aren't responsive to his extensions of the actual links. I think that if you're going to defend a policy action, you need to be answering why the state is a good actor. So all of the reasons why the state is bad go basically conceded, and so we'll talk about how that factors into gendered violence. I think that the gendered violence argument is an attempt to answer this, but the neg is framing his K as a prerequisite to this. This is done on both the outflow and the neg flow. He says that we have gendered violence and patriarchy as a result of working within the state. So I think you need to be answering a prerequisite argument there. But also there's 2 links that he re-extends in ways. He says that you, one, you use policy as a way to counter the suppression, and 2, you try to pacify and silence those that are oppressed by resolving one issue through the advocacy as an attempt to appease them. That's the homo-nationalism argument. On the perm debate, you can see that working within the state would be a dissad to the perm, and you're also conceding his role of the ballot, so the Fernando evidence just isn't just a way to get out of the perm, but it's also his role of the ballot extension. If you don't make responses to his role of the ballot, he says that we have to leave the queer unintelligible, and that this is accomplished through him using the metaphor of a queer suicide bomber, but then also the perm would be a net harm to that advocacy because you're reinscribing lines. It's the idea that we can combine 2 ideas and put them together and try to understand them. That's trying to make the queer intelligible, and he says we should remain unintelligible to the queer. So his role of the ballot claims to function on a higher layer than substance. It's uncontested, so I can vote there. And he's also probably right that you're not extending actual offense. Like there's not enough work done on the AC flow and beating back his responses. Like that is a prerequisite, or the Puar 07 argument that you have your biological understanding of gender. So,
Okay, I think both those judges said some pretty smart things. I end up deciding kind of differently though. The main argument, well, the first argument that was big was the first case argument from the negative about how the alt is a prereq to doing the AF, and I also, even though it's not framed this way, take it to be a kind of alt solves case argument. He says that making the body unintelligible solves the reasons why abortion is denied in the status quo, that we have certain constructions of what the body is and what the body can do that prevent women from having abortions. I don't think it's explained super well by the neg in either speech. I think the 2NR was an opportunity to expand on this argument, or at least slow down a little bit and explain how it really turns the case, but it's dropped by the AF. And it has a lot of different impacts. For one, it means that your perm is not net beneficial because he solves the net benefit to the perm, which is the AF. So if the alternative solves 100% of the AF, then any link would be sufficient to vote that the perm is not net beneficial. I also think the Fernando evidence is good to take out the perm because the perm can't solve the alt, and given that you've conceded alt solvency, I think he outweighs on strength of link and explains that pretty well in the 2NR. I give him a good bit of leeway, even though I don't think it's explained particularly well, just because you don't have an argument on alt solvency at all. I don't remember you saying anything about suicide bomber or making anything unintelligible or answering the Puar evidence specifically. You should assert that he is not concrete without actually answering the AF that the neg is reading, which I think is important. The AF is not, or the neg was not really specific in linking to the AF, but at the very least, state link was something that the AF defended, whereas none of the alt can't solve type arguments that you're making, even though you don't frame them in those terms, talk about the alternative at all. So I think that the neg is ahead in terms of specificity. I agree with what Sydney said about how that seems to be a problem with the perm double bind, but you have to, when answering it, if the neg links aren't specific, but you have to say that. You have to say, this is why the links are not specific to the AF, and this is what the links are to that the alternative has to overcome, and why the alternative cannot overcome them. But if you don't say the alternative cannot overcome specifically, like the violence that the state does for XY reasons, I'm going to assume that the alternative does, given that that is what the 2AR has said when he sends it, and that there's no press on it from the 1AR or 2AR. So that argument was pretty big. The second reason I think I can vote neg is the roll of the ballot. I usually think that roll of the ballot is a cheap shot argument. I don't really like it, but I don't have a 2AR response from you on the extension of the roll of ballot, which he says is an independent voting issue and constrains what offense. I'm trying to look for the exact rhetoric in the 2NR, but he says that, none of your offense links to the roll of the ballot, so there's no net benefit to the perm. There's no reason to do it if it doesn't link to the roll of the ballot. So I don't think that your perm is, any of the perm arguments are framed in terms of what engages in queer unintelligibility the best. So I don't think that offense links to the roll of ballot. Lastly, I look at the no-link arguments, because if you do win a strong no-link, all of this is premised on him winning this state bad argument, but I don't think any of your no-links really deal with that particular link. Really, this is just AF offense to his impact, or maybe some semblance of offense to his roll of the ballot, like women with an X, or AF cares about women of color. But neither of those arguments answers that the state is bad, which again is something that the AF neg has not extended or explained really well in the context of the AF, but it's something you dropped. I agree with what Andres said about not having defense of the state being bad in the context of this K in particular. I think you should have gone. I think there was a plausible 2AR where you go for the U-link arguments. I thought I didn't have a 2NR answer to this argument that if categorization of bodies is the problem, then the neg is just as bad, because you have categorized people people as, well, I do harm to queer black bodies, which is an implicit categorization. I think I don't have a two-in-our answer to that at all. So that in combination with the perm maybe would have been better because, and well, you'd have to deal with this alt solves case argument, but maybe that was a better option, a better source of offense for you. Just some quick advice for the negative. I think we all think that the entire neg strategy needs to deal with the app a whole lot better. Like, it's really bad in cross-X when she's like, where in the app do I defend this, whatever the Puar link is, and you're like, I don't have to point out a line in the app, and like, she's like, oh, so where is it in the app? You're like, it's in lots of your cards.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
It's in lots of the cards, but we don't know which one. That was a pretty bad moment.
I'm supposed to remind the judges that if they have fight Bs, they should
Yeah,
go.
go ahead. It seems that you really just want to talk about Deleuze and not talk about the app, which is bad for you. Times when you can be more specific. When you're making link arguments, obviously we talked about that. When you're making root cause arguments and when you're making alt solves case arguments are all good opportunities for